11-year-old girl's letter shocks the president. His response stuns the nation. There are places in this world that seem forgotten, places so far removed from the bright lights of cities that they don't even appear on a map. In one such place, San Lomas, a small town tucked away along the desolate southern border, life had come to a standstill. San Lomas was once a peaceful community, filled with laughter, warmth, and families who worked hard and cared for one another. But over time, shadows began to creep across its streets, and those shadows brought fear. A ruthless gang had taken control, silencing the town with violence and intimidation. Doors stayed locked, windows were shut tight. The once bustling town square was now nothing more than an echo of memories, its cobblestones cracked, its air heavy with hopelessness. And in the middle of it all was Isabella, just 11 years old, yet carrying the weight of a world that no child should have to bear. She had grown up in this silence, in this town where people spoke in whispers and looked over their shoulders. Her father, Luis, a kind and honest mechanic, was loved by everyone who knew him. He stood tall for what was right, even when the world around him was crumbling. But standing up came at a price. One day, Isabella would later recall, my father refused to work for the men who controlled everything. He wouldn't repair their trucks, wouldn't help them move what they wanted, and so they killed him, right there, on the street, in front of our house. Her mother had grabbed her, pulling her away from the window. Don't look, Isabella. Don't cry. Silence is the only way to survive. And so Isabella learned silence. For months her small home became even smaller, its walls closing in with each day filled with fear. No one spoke out. No one dared resist. It was as if the town had forgotten how to hope, forgotten what life once felt like. But Isabella, even at her young age, could no longer bear the silence. Late one night, with the flicker of a kerosene lamp lighting up her small wooden desk, Isabella made a choice. She pulled out an old crumpled sheet of paper and a pencil. Her hands trembled, but her heart was steady. She began to write, Dear Mr. President, my name is Isabella. I am 11 years old and I live in San Lomas. I don't know if you will ever read this, but I need to try. Our town is no longer a home. The adults are scared, and we, the children, have no future. My father was taken because he did what was right. My mother tells me to stay silent, but I can't anymore. Please help us, because if no one does anything, nothing will ever change. As she wrote, her words poured onto the page, carrying all the pain and courage of a child who refused to accept the darkness. When she finished, Isabella carefully folded the letter and held it close to her chest, as if she were holding her last thread of hope. That night she didn't sleep, and the next morning, as the first rays of sun stretched across the empty streets of San Lomas, Isabella put the letter inside her jacket. She made her way to the edge of town where the last bus still passed by. The driver, a kind-faced man with tired eyes, looked down at her in surprise. Where are you going with that, Isabella? He asked softly. She looked up at him, her voice firm despite her small frame. I need you to take this letter. It's for the president. The driver's face fell, his hands tightening on the wheel. Isabella, sending this letter, it's dangerous. You know that, right? She nodded, her gaze steady. I know. But I don't have another choice. The driver studied her for a long moment before finally sighing. He reached out, took the letter, and tucked it safely into his bag. All right, kid. I'll do it. But you'd better be careful. As the bus rumbled away, carrying Isabella's fragile hope with it, she stood there, watching until it disappeared beyond the hills. Her heart was racing, her mind filled with questions. Would her letter reach its destination? Would anyone care enough to read it? Could one small act truly change anything? What Isabella didn't yet know was that her letter, written with shaky hands but unwavering courage, would soon find its way to the president's desk. And what happened next would not only change her life, but would send ripples of hope across an entire nation. The old bus creaked as it rolled out of San Lomas, a cloud of dust trailing behind. Inside, the bus driver gripped his bag tightly, glancing nervously at the letter hidden within. It was just paper, yet it carried a weight that could shatter the silence. Or ignite a storm. Isabella's words echoed in his mind. "Please, take this to the president. I don't have another choice." Hours later, he arrived at a small, forgotten post office in the neighboring town. The weary postal worker stared at the envelope, reading the address aloud in disbelief. "To the President of the United States." The driver's voice was steady. "It has to get there." The postal worker hesitated, his fingers lingering on the envelope. Something about the uneven, childish handwriting tugged at him. With a nod, he tucked it into the outgoing mail pile, never imagining where it would go next. Days later, the letter landed on the desk of Tom Reyes, a grizzled journalist who had spent decades chasing forgotten stories. The world had heartened him, but when he unfolded Isabella's letter and began to read, something broke inside. "Dear Mr. President, our town is no longer a home. The adults are scared, and we, the children, have no future." Tom's hands trembled as he reached the final line. He whispered, almost to himself, a child's voice, reminding us of what we've ignored for too long. The fire inside him reignited. He penned a raw, urgent article exposing the horrors of San Lomas, Isabella's bravery, and the forgotten people living under the gang's shadow. He sent it to every major publication and made one last call to an old friend in the White House. "You need to see this," he said simply. The letter arrived on the president's desk days later. In the silence of the Oval Office, the president read Isabella's words. Each sentence struck him like a blow, a child's plea for help, a town drowning in darkness. His advisors spoke cautiously. "Sir, this is a complicated situation. It's too risky." The president's response was firm, his voice cutting through their hesitation. "If a child can be this brave, then we have no excuse. The greatest risk is doing nothing. I want a plan on my desk immediately." Far away, in the quiet of her small home, Isabella sat by the window, staring out at the empty streets. She didn't know that her letter had reached the most powerful man in the country. She didn't know that change had already begun. But hope, small and fragile, had left San Lomas, and it was now unstoppable. In the dead of night, quiet figures moved through the forgotten streets of San Lomas. They were federal agents, blending seamlessly into the broken town, their eyes sharp and watchful. Their mission was clear: expose the gang that had strangled San Lomas into silence and gather every piece of evidence to dismantle their raid. For days, the agents moved in shadows, posing as locals. They studied the smuggling routes, hidden warehouses, and the crooked officials who kept the gang untouchable. Each detail brought them closer to the truth and closer to danger. But Raphael, the ruthless gang leader, was no fool. From his perch in a crumbling mansion at the town's edge, he watched everything. When he noticed small changes, townsfolk meeting his gaze instead of looking away, whispers spreading where silence once reigned, his instincts flared. "They're up to something," Raphael growled, his eyes narrowing as he glared at his men. "If we don't strike first, everything we've built will fall apart." His orders were swift and brutal. That night, the roar of truck engines shattered the quiet. The gang swept through homes, dragging innocent people into the streets. Their message was clear: anyone helping outsiders would pay the price. Isabella woke to the sound of shouting. Her heart pounded as she ran to the window, just in time to see the unthinkable: her mother being pulled away by rough hands, shoved into the back of a truck. "Mom!" she screamed, her voice breaking, but the darkness swallowed her cries. The truck disappeared, leaving only silence and the faint smell of diesel. Inside their small, empty home, Isabella's hands shook as she clutched her mother's sweater. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "They took her," she whispered, her voice trembling. But even in that moment of despair, something else flickered. Resolve. She stood tall, her small figure unyielding. I can't wait for someone else to save her." At sunrise, Isabella walked with purpose through the crumbling streets of San Lomas. She found the federal agents huddled in a makeshift base, reviewing maps and photos under dim lantern light. The commanding officer looked up, surprised to see her standing there, her face pale but her eyes burning with determination. "What are you doing here?" he asked gently. Isabella stepped forward, her voice steady. "I know where they've taken her. I can help." The room fell silent. The officer studied the small girl in front of him, so young and fragile, yet braver than anyone he had met. Finally he spoke, his tone both cautious and firm. "If you help us, you must follow our instructions exactly. Promise me." Isabella nodded without hesitation. "I promise." Around her, the agents exchanged glances. They had come to San Lomas as outsiders, but here was a child offering them the key to save not only her mother but the entire town. Inspired by her courage, they moved quickly, plans falling into place. As the sun dipped behind the hills that evening, unmarked vehicles rolled into position on the outskirts of the town. The agents prepared for a high-stakes mission, their goal clear: rescue the captives and dismantle Raphael's stronghold. For Isabella, the weight felt endless. She sat on a small crate, gripping her mother's sweater tightly in her lap, whispering softly, "Hold on, Mom, I'm coming." She had done her part. Now, the fight to bring her mother home and to bring San Lomas back to life had begun. Night fell over San Lomas, heavy and still. The stars watched from above as silent figures moved into position, their shadows blending into the dark. Federal operatives, dressed in black, gripped their weapons tightly. They were ready. At the edge of the town, Isabella stood with the commanding officer, her small frame illuminated by the glow of a lantern. She had done her part, showing them the hidden paths her father once used, the tunnels, the places no one else remembered. The officer knelt beside her, his voice steady. "Stay here. No matter what you hear, stay safe." Isabella nodded, clutching her mother's sweater to her chest. "Bring her back," she whispered. The officer gave her a small nod before turning to his team. With a single signal, the operation began. The strike was swift and merciless. The federal operatives stormed Raphael's stronghold, a decaying mansion perched on the edge of town that had become the gang's fortress. The silence shattered as doors exploded open and flashlights sliced through the darkness like lightning. Gunfire erupted, sharp cracks echoing through the halls. Shouts rang out as agents moved quickly, room by room, freeing captives and subduing gang members. Chaos roared through the building, but the agents remained steady, their every step measured, their mission clear: take down Raphael and rescue the innocent. Deep within the mansion, Raphael watched as his empire crumbled. His men fell one by one, and the walls that had once protected him now felt like a prison. Rage flashed in his eyes. "We're not finished yet," he roared, grabbing a weapon and disappearing into the hidden tunnels beneath the house. A final, desperate attempt to escape. But Raphael had underestimated one thing: Isabella's knowledge of San Lomas. As the agents moved through the stronghold, Isabella's guidance proved invaluable. "The tunnels," she had said earlier. They lead to the old mill outside town. Following her directions, operatives surrounded every exit, their weapons raised and ready. When Raphael emerged from the tunnel, gasping for air, he stopped short. Bright beams of light hit his face. "Freeze! Drop your weapon!" an agent commanded. Raphael sneered, his defiance flickering like a dying flame. He raised his gun, but before he could fire, a single shot rang out. The weapon clattered to the ground as Raphael fell to his knees, his empire reduced to dust. "Game over," the lead agent muttered as Raphael was hauled to his feet and shackled. The first rays of dawn began to break over San Lomas. In the clearing near the mansion, the rescued hostages emerged, their faces pale, their hands trembling. Among them was Isabella's mother, her eyes searching desperately through the crowd. "Isabella?" she called softly, her voice cracking with emotion. And then she saw her, standing at the edge of the clearing, her small figure bathed in the soft golden light of morning. Isabella ran, tears streaming down her face as she threw herself into her mother's arms. "Mob," she sobbed, clinging tightly. Her mother held her close, her voice shaking. "You saved me. You saved us all." Isabella pulled back just enough to meet her mother's gaze, her tears still falling but her eyes filled with quiet strength. "No, Mom," she said softly. "We saved ourselves, together." The dawn that followed the rescue brought more than sunlight. It brought hope. For the first time in years, the streets of San Lomas were filled with people stepping out of their homes, blinking into the golden light like they were seeing it for the first time. The silence that had once gripped the town was gone, replaced by the sounds of life, hammers striking nails, shovels turning soil, and voices. Voices that no longer whispered in fear. Federal teams arrived with trucks full of supplies, construction tools, and workers ready to help. But they weren't alone. The townspeople of San Lomas, inspired by Isabella's courage, joined in with their own hands and hearts. Side by side, they repaired shattered windows, mended broken doors, and cleared away the debris of a life they were ready to leave behind. Among them was Isabella, her small hands gripping a paintbrush as she stood before the wall of an old, crumbling building. Her mother watched from nearby, her heart swelling with pride as Isabella began to paint. Stroke by stroke, bright colors came to life, soft yellows and oranges blending into a powerful sunrise stretching across the wall. Above the rising sun, white doves flew free, their wings spread wide. A group of children gathered around, watching in quiet awe as the mural took shape. One boy, his voice soft, finally asked, "What are you painting?" Isabella turned, her face glowing with determination. "I'm painting our future," she said, "a place where we don't need to hide anymore." Those words spread through the town like wildfire, igniting something deep inside every heart. People who had once believed they were powerless now stood tall. Parents smiled for the first time in years, and children laughed as they played along streets that were no longer empty. Days turned into weeks, and San Lomas began to transform. The old community center, once abandoned and crumbling, was rebuilt with care, brick by brick, by the hands of those who refused to give up. When it was finally finished, a sign was unveiled above its entrance, the Isabella Unity Hall. The entire town gathered for the opening. Tears filled Isabella's eyes as she stood in front of the building named in her honor. Her mother held her close and whispered, "You did this, Isabella. You gave us back our hope." But Isabella shook her head, her voice soft but steady. "We did it, together." Word of San Lomas's rebirth spread far and wide, and then, one day, something extraordinary happened. A helicopter touched down in the town square, its blades kicking up dust as it landed. The townspeople gathered, whispering in disbelief as the figure of the President of the United States stepped out, humbly and without fanfare. There were no grand speeches, no elaborate ceremonies. He stood quietly among the people of San Lomas, his eyes reflecting both admiration and humility. "This town," the president said, his voice carrying across the square, "has shown us something that we must never forget. Even the smallest voice can light the way to change." He turned to Isabella, who stood at the front of the crowd, clutching her mother's hand. The president smiled, his gaze steady. "You, Isabella, reminded us of something powerful, that courage comes not from strength, but from hope. And sometimes, hope begins with just one voice." The crowd erupted in applause, tears of pride and joy streaming down the faces of the townspeople. For years, San Lomas had been forgotten, shrouded in darkness. But now, standing under the open sky, they felt reborn. As the sun set that evening, its golden light spilled across the town, bathing everything in warmth. The mural Isabella painted, her rising sun and doves, glowed brighter than ever, a symbol of San Lomas's new beginning. For the first time, laughter echoed freely in the streets. Children played, families gathered, and the town square buzzed with life. Isabella stood beside her mother, watching it all unfold. She felt the warmth of the sun on her face and smiled quietly. The town was alive again, and this time it was stronger than ever before. Because one voice had been brave enough to speak, and now an entire community had found its way back to the light. As the sun rose higher, the townspeople gathered in silence near the stronghold, watching as federal vehicles carried Rafael and his men away. The weight that had suffocated San Lomas for so long seemed to lift, replaced by something unfamiliar. Hope? For the first time in years, the streets didn't feel empty. The people of San Lomas stood together, side by side, their eyes turned toward the horizon, where the sun now shone brighter than ever before. And in the middle of it all stood Isabella, a small girl whose courage had sparked a fire no darkness could ever extinguish. Months later, San Lomas stood transformed. The streets that had once been silent now rang with laughter, chatter, and the sounds of life returning. Children ran through the town square, their joy echoing against freshly painted walls. Shops were open, schools were filled, and neighbors once afraid to speak now stood shoulder to shoulder, rebuilding their lives together. At the heart of it all stood the Isabella Unity Hall, a testament to the town's rebirth. Just inside its doors, framed and carefully preserved, hung Isabella's letter, a reminder of where it all began. If no one does anything, nothing will ever change. Isabella sat quietly beneath her mural of a golden sunrise, its colors alive with hope. Above her, the American flag rippled gently in the breeze, a symbol of resilience and unity. She gazed at it, her heart full, as an elder approached and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You showed us something we had forgotten, Isabella," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "Even when we felt powerless, you reminded us that courage and hope can move mountains. Together, we can overcome anything." Isabella smiled softly, her eyes bright. She looked out at her town, her people, and whispered, "We did this together." This story may be fictional, but the truth it carries is very real. Even the smallest voice, when filled with courage, can spark extraordinary change. When we choose hope over fear and action over silence, no shadow is too deep and no challenge too great to overcome. What about you? Have you ever witnessed how a small act of bravery can inspire others and change everything? Or have you experienced moments where hope made all the difference? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video to spread its message. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this one. Share this story to to remind others of the power of hope. Together, we can keep the light alive, one story at a time.